Hello all you Asari-loving cosmonauts. As always, I am Cosmic, and today, finally, we are going to be reviewing Mass Effect Andromeda, the latest Mass Effect game from BioWare and EA. Those of you who watched my preview of the game know my first impressions, and especially my skepticisms coming into the full release. But let's get on with it and talk about the actual game finally. So first I wanted to start talking about the setting, the story, and the characters of the game, because for me, one of the apexes of the Mass Effect franchise is of course the story, its characters, its dialogue, its writing, and everything that is to do with the core narrative of the games themselves. Andromeda takes a break from the trilogy, takes a break from the Milky Galaxy, and sets place 600 years in the future after Mass Effect 2, and places you in the role of the Pathfinder of the Andromeda Initiative, which is a mass exodus into the Andromeda Galaxy looking for a new world to settle. What I liked about this premise is the fact that it does one thing right. It gets away from Shepard. And I think after the debacle that was Mass Effect 3's ending and the upset that that caused, and ultimately the hit the franchise took to its reputation and ultimately to its credibility, I think it was the right direction for the developers to move away from the Milky Way and just really try and take what was great about Mass Effect, which was of course these diverse aliens and the universe overall, and just pop that into another galaxy and basically make what Mass Effect 3 was all about irrelevant. Now, on one hand, I love that. On the other hand, the execution of that story, the execution of that premise, has holes all over. And it is very problematic. And I think as an overall story, and I'm not going to spoil the story for you, I will say that I really did enjoy the story, even flaws and all. I have to say that in terms of the franchise's longevity, I think that this could be the spark, and it's a rough spark, and it's, got its problems for sure, but I think that it could be the spark that sets the Mass Effect franchise on a different path. That said, it does certainly have its flaws even within its story itself. So the first thing is the fact that it doesn't really make sense to me that the Andromeda Initiative basically comes out of nowhere. It comes out of some guy being in love with AI and decides that he wants to leave the Milky Way because he hates the Milky Way, basically, and wants to go off on an adventure. For me, that is a very lazy way of putting it, and it doesn't directly to relate to anything that was going on in the Milky Way at the time. For me, it would have made more sense for the council races to come together, knowing that the high-level people would have known about the Reapers at the time. It would have just made sense to just say the Andromeda Initiative was created on the basis that, the Reaper threat was real and that we needed to find a way to survive. That, for me, is a much more solid, grounded foundation within the universe itself than just saying, well, we're a bunch of dreamers and explorers and we want to go off to another galaxy. That, for me, is really lazy writing, and I didn't like that fact. I think that it would have been easy just to ground it within the established Mass Effect universe itself, and it would have been believable. No one would have had a problem with that setting. One of Andromeda's biggest strong points this time round is the fact that it has some really great characters. It has a fantastic cast of characters with the crew. There's a nice emphasis on character development versus... I always felt that with the original Mass Effect trilogy, each character that you had on board your ship was a representative of that race, because you had Rex, who was my favourite character in Mass Effect, and Garrus, who was also my other favourite character in Mass Effect, and those two were basically ambassadors to teach you about, the Krogan and the Taurians, and you had the Solarians and all that kind of thing. And each character that you kind of got were almost ambassadors for their race. They had, some kind of patriotism in some form or another. Whereas in Andromeda, You don't need that anymore. Don't need a Garrus-type character telling you about all things Turian anymore. And thankfully, the developers have actually realised that, and instead, yes, you have a diverse cast of characters on your crew that are from various alien races, both new and old, but they don't sit there tell you about their ways anymore. They are individual characters, and the development and the progression of your relationship with these characters is about them as people versus them as a representative of their race. However, the story and its characters are held back by really two things. The first is the writing. Now, while I did certainly enjoy a lot of the writing in the game, I felt that there were certain points where it really let both the characters, the situation, and the story overall down. I think that there were certain areas where the writing was really poor. It was not well executed at all. They didn't really think about the context and the tone in which the conversation was going, and that was also reflected within the voice acting itself. Now, for me, the voice acting, for the most part, was very, very good. For a lot of the characters, I think that particularly Male Rider was a little bit of a problem, and he sounds like a really arrogant, naive, ignorant asshole for the most part, and I don't think his lines were written well at all. They just sounded really cheesy, they sounded offhand, a lot of them didn't fit the situation, and again, it also comes back to the dialogue wheel. Why can't I see what I'm going to say, what I'm actually going to say? I have no problem with dialogue wheels, but if your dialogue wheel says, oh, this isn't a problem, and then you come out with something completely different to what that dialogue wheel said, that for me is a big issue, and yet again we have returned to this within the dialogue wheel system itself. Overall, I did enjoy the narrative. I think it was a good narrative, it was a good story, it was packed full of good characters, it had certain flaws throughout, but I felt that as an overall product, as an overall story, it executed what it wanted to execute fairly well and kept me fairly interested, even though I felt that for the most part, particularly at the start of the game, maybe the first 6 hours or so, the pacing was just way off. But let's get on to the core gameplay. Now, there's a couple of things that I absolutely loved about Andromeda. I thought the controls were great. I thought the character movement, the freedom of movement, the more verticality to the levels, the more openness and the more open worldness of the levels themselves worked very well. Yes, it inherently caused issues and bugs, but I thought that I enjoyed, as for the most part, the freedom that it provided. I always think that, for me, Mass Effect Andromeda, in terms of its core gameplay, is Mass Effect basically meets Dragon Age Inquisition. And what you have is you have the freedom and exploration of Dragon Age Inquisition, but with a better combat system. And I have to say that Mass Effect is a better combat system. The third person, mixed with a little bit of melee, mixed with all the biotics, it does provide an enjoyable experience. Is it perfect? No. Is it considered excellent? No, but I felt that for the most part I enjoyed Mass Effect Andromeda's core gameplay in terms of its movement and its combat a hell of a lot better than I did with Dragon Age Inquisition. Now, while Mass Effect Andromeda certainly has bugs and issues, and I'll get into those in a moment, I think it also has some core design issues. First, the exploration for me was a bit of a problem. I love the fact that they returned to having a vehicle accessible in terms of the Nomad, and that meant you could get around these open levels a lot quicker. However, I have to say that in terms of the galaxy map, which was absolutely stunning and beautiful, by the way, holy crap, was that a time sink, and an unnecessary one at that. The amount of time it takes to just travel between planets, because they're trying to do this really showy travel between planets with the camera, pan around the solar system, that kind of thing. It was just so tedious and time consuming, and just got really frustrating that I couldn't bloody skip it. Now, I understand if you're trying to hide cutscenes at times to have a little bit of a CGI moment or a little bit of a cutscene, but at the same time, there's no reason to have a loading screen between planets on the galaxy map because you're just showing basically static assets for the most part. And I think that the amount of time it took just to get round the bloody galaxy map was so ridiculous, and it artificially just added time to the game for no bloody reason whatsoever. Resource collection has once again returned to Mass Effect, and for me, it drives me bloody crazy. Now, I have no problem necessarily with people putting in resource collection, and I think that a lot of people do certainly enjoy it, and they enjoy going out, exploring, and finding materials so that they can craft the things that they want to craft. However, for me, it would have been nice to have options in there. So, for example, if I didn't want to spend an hour roaming around a planet trying to find out all the various mining locations, instead maybe I could have just sent off my crew to do it, because I can only take 2 crew members with me at any given time. So why can't I just delegate and send off people to do it? And I think just giving players options in that regard for people who don't enjoy resource collection just would have been a nice touch for me. Now, barring the tedious mining, I have to say that in terms of the questing of the game, I felt that overall it was fairly well done. There were a couple of quests, particularly the side quests and the tasks, that I felt were artificially dragged out, had a lot of back and forth, that was no real point to it, a lot of backtracking, and I also felt that there were certain additional tasks that, while certainly rewarding to complete, were a little bit of a mind-numbing busy work and didn't really add anything to the overall experience. The main questing worked really well, and the majority of the side quests, including things like companion loyalty missions, were very rewarding, and I have to say that I enjoyed the quests for the most part. If there was one thing I really had to come down hard on in terms of the questing, would be the pacing and the trigger points of those quests. I have to say that as you progress in the game, things change and certain locations will change depending on what happens. And for me, those trigger points didn't really work so well, and I think they could have been a little better, because there were just times where you were able to access side quests that didn't directly relate to the main story of the game, but let's say mentioned events that took place in the main story of the game, and you were able to access those side quests before you had actually gotten to that point in the main story, which meant that the dialogue of those side quests felt really out of place, awkward, and just completely broke immersion. Now, lastly, in terms of the core gameplay elements I want to touch on is, of course, the RPG progression. There's a couple of things I really loved about Mass Effect Andromeda. One was the level up system and the player ability and skills progression system. I absolutely loved that you had not only the various trees to input your points to earn new skills, and there was a lot of skills to be able to take on board. I loved the profile system, which the Pathfinder can use to basically switch out various statistical bonuses and how you play the game. And it's very much open in that sense. Your character progression is directly tied to basically what you're interested in. You can choose any path you want. So if you want a hybrid between a soldier and engineer, you can do that. If you want to be like me and hybrid between, combat and biotics, which would make you a vanguard, you can totally do that too. And you can really just build your character structure around your preferred playstyle. And I think that openness and the depth of the progression here was very well done. I also loved the fact that they returned in the Mass Effect franchise to a inventory system where I could switch out armors, I could have various different armor parts, different weapons, and also augment those weapons and armor. I love those facts. That for me is one of the core pillars of any given RPG, and that is of course loot and crafting things and making your equipment and your weapons better. And for me, Mass Effect Andromeda pulled that off very well. Sure, I would have liked a little bit more variety and a lot more weapons and armors to choose from, but I thought what was there worked very well. Now I want to get on to the biggest problem with the game, which is of course the state of the game, because it is a buggy, hellish mess. It is problematic all round. FPS drops, bugs, visual animation glitches, popping, all kinds of issues that range from visual to audio and back again. Now, I did not encounter any game-breaking bugs in that regard, but this shit is noticeable, and it is noticeable in your face on a consistent basis throughout the title. A lot of this stuff can be patched out with optimization, with bug fixes, and I have no doubt that it will be. But I have to say, as overall performance goes, as overall stability goes, as overall execution goes, it is not up to par what I would expect from a BioWare title. And I have to say that I was very disappointed in that regard. It certainly breaks immersion for you in terms of really getting into the world. Now, one of the biggest problems in terms of immersion was, of course, the big controversy of Mass Effect Andromeda, which is, of course, the facial animations. It was something I've talked about way before, even when they released the gameplay trailers. I had spoken about how I knew from those gameplay trailers at the very start that the facial animations were going to be problematic. And of course, they were, and they still are, and they probably will be for the life cycle of the game, and that is just how it is. For me, the facial animations, it is not the biggest thing in the world. It is not, game breaking. It is not, oh, I will never buy this game again. I think, however, that it is noticeable, and it is noticeable in a big way. There are not only facial animation issues, there's lip syncing issues, there's voice acting issues like I talked about, and for me, when you are building a so directly narratively driven game, you have to get this right. This is something that when you're building a game that centers around a hell of a lot of dialogue, a hell of a lot of cutscenes, hell of a lot of character interaction, you have to get the facial animations right. And the fact that some characters not only have bad facial animations, but some characters don't even have any, that is a big bloody issue, and it's not something you can just smooth over and say, oh, sorry. Like, that is a really big issue. The delivery of the dialogue has problems at times. The writing has problems. The voice acting has problems. The lip sync has problems. And the facial animations are just god-awful. And they are noticeable throughout the game. It's not like there's just pockets of this. And it's not like it's just side characters. Multiple characters, multiple main characters have serious facial animation issues, not to mention all the body animation issues that go on with, arms twisting round and necks twisting round and all the crazy crap that happens that, I wasn't sure if I was watching a Mass Effect game or I was playing a Poltergeist game, but it is one of those things that it is very bad and it is not up to standard. Now, that being said, I want everyone to clearly understand what I'm saying here. There are specific and noticeable faults with Andromeda. There are noticeable faults throughout Andromeda. However, I don't think that they are deal-breaking faults. I think that they are noticeable, they are very disappointing, very disappointing, and I think that BioWare needs to realise that they've really screwed the pooch on this one in terms of polish and execution. However, I think that it does not mean that this is a bad game. I think that actually, in terms of its core mechanics, in terms of the story, in terms of the overall product as a whole, it is actually a fairly good game. Is it a great game? No, it's not. Is it an excellent game? Hell no, it's not. But it's a good game. And I think that it shows potential for the future of the Mass Effect franchise. I would like to return to Andromeda again. I would like to have it better and more well executed, but I certainly would like to return to Andromeda again. I think for me, if you're thinking about buying this game, for me, I would wait. And that's just flat out. I would wait. Not to mention the fact that the multiplayer is completely pay to win, and I absolutely despise multiplayer, and I have done since, Mass Effect multiplayer was invented. But I want to tell you to wait, because I just don't think until they patch out a lot of the technical issues of the game and the bugs that occur, it's just worth waiting for a sale until those issues are resolved. You don't want to be spending $60+ to buy a bug-ridden game. However, it is worth buying at some point. It is worth playing at some point. It is content-packed. The story is enjoyable. And for me, it has a lot of potential for the future of Mass Effect. I am very disappointed in the title overall, but I think Mass Effect fans will definitely enjoy the game. I think that most people will enjoy the game overall. Yes, there are clear issues, but that doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it. I certainly, like I say, recommend picking it up in a sale. Wait until a couple of those bugs and technical issues have been ironed out, and then enjoy the experience overall. So that is my review of Mass Effect Andromeda. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you next time.